Many observers are currently focusing on the immediate tactical implications of a recent deep strike, yet they may be missing the profound strategic shift it represents. The notion that vast geographical size offers an inherent security guarantee for national borders is now being fundamentally challenged. Autonomous systems, small in scale but immense in their operational reach, are systematically rewriting the established rules of aerial warfare. This new reality was starkly demonstrated on a recent night when the Russian Federation found its traditional defense doctrines entirely circumvented, an event that has sent ripples through global aviation strategies. The sequence of events began when Russia, anticipating an escalation of the conflict, opted to relocate its most advanced fighter jets, including the Su-57 and Su-34, moving them a full 1,700 kilometers from the front lines. This forced relocation of high-value assets deep into Russia's interior marks a significant departure from historical military doctrine, where geographical depth traditionally offered inherent protection. It underscores a new vulnerability for strategic assets previously considered beyond reach. In fact, the necessity of moving Russia's most precious aircraft behind the Ural Mountains was not a sudden development. This forced and frantic migration was the clear result of pressure Ukraine had gradually escalated over previous months, directly targeting strategic bases deep within Russian territory. Past attacks on the Su-57s at the Akhtubinsk base in the Astrakhan region, in particular, had caused alarm bells to ring violently in the dark corridors of Moscow. Panicking after this shocking vulnerability, the Russian command echelon signed off on a highly radical and hasty evacuation decision to protect those last remaining valuable air assets. The valuable fleets in all Western bases relatively close to the front line were immediately dismantled and extracted through midnight operations in recent times. Critical facilities with multi-billion-dollar infrastructures, particularly the Engels Strategic Bomber Base and Akhtubinsk, had now become open targets, veritable death traps for these rare aircraft. The new and permanent destination was the Chagall Military Air Base, located within the borders of the harsh-climbed Chelyabinsk Oblast in the southern Ural region, quite close to the Asian continent. This massive, costly, and complex logistical operation was carried out through a combination of night-running military cargo trains, covered trucks, and direct transfer flights conducted under a radio blackout. The staff's only hope was to definitively distance these special fleets, worth billions of dollars, from Ukraine's long-range missiles and constantly evolving stealth kamikaze drones. However, a critical truth was either entirely overlooked by Russian military intelligence, met with technological blindness, or deemed too sensitive to report to higher command. From the outset of this supposedly top-secret transport operation, Ukraine possessed full awareness of every detail, including each aircraft's tail number and their precise apron coordinates upon landing. The clandestine movement of such a substantial fleet in the transparent and digitally interconnected modern battle space, particularly aircraft with significant radar signatures like the Su-57, was already a technically unfeasible endeavor. Ukraine's cyber intelligence units had quietly deciphered unusual activity and military cargo routes on Russian railway networks weeks in advance. Real-time satellite telemetry data merged seamlessly with encrypted messages dispatched from the field by deep-cover local partisans. The distant Chagall base, designated as the new home for the Su-57s and the bomber variant Su-34s, had already been marked on the target boards of the Ukrainian staff prior to the aircraft's arrival. The exact number of aircraft transported to the Chagall Air Base was known. Following these critical intelligence confirmations, the decisive action that fundamentally altered the conflict's trajectory was initiated on the night of April 25, 2026. The Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces precisely targeted the Chagall Air Base, previously assumed to be absolutely secure, a full 1,700 kilometers from its borders. The attack transpired in complete darkness at this deep, cold, and covert military facility in the eastern coordinates, in close proximity to Russia's Asian borders. For this extensive operation, the Ukrainian army deployed fleets of long-range, one-way attack drones. These autonomous kamikaze unmanned aerial vehicles, developed entirely through indigenous engineering, specifically the Lyuty Bober and similar as yet unnamed state-of-the-art models, served as the silent, audacious protagonists in the skies during this singular and daring operation. Carrying highly destructive explosive warheads weighing approximately 100 kilograms, these drones were not conventional remote-controlled commercial devices or simple imitations. They were sophisticated, autonomous systems equipped with advanced, artificial intelligence-supported optical terrain recognition, capable of navigation even in the event of satellite connection loss. The extensive layers of electronic warfare and GPS signal jammers, which Russia had heavily invested in and boasted about, proved insufficient to blind these machines, which remained autonomously locked onto their targets. Owing to their exceptional fuel efficiency, the Ukrainian drones maintained airborne status for over 10 hours, gliding undetected deep within Russian airspace, often skimming treetops. The first center of the unmanned systems forces, recognized as the world's inaugural official drone army, alongside the renowned Magyar's Birds Brigade, were the principal architects of this historic strike. In the final terminal phase, the drones executed a sudden ascent before diving flawlessly at a lethal angle into the multi-billion-dollar targets arrayed on the Chagall aprons. The scene revealed at dawn on the morning following the attack represented, in every sense, an irreversible and devastating strategic setback for the Kremlin leadership. On May 1, 2026, the Ukrainian General Staff officially announced the decisive and overwhelming results of this significant deep strike operation to the international community. Unmanned Systems Forces Commander Robert Magyar Brovdy openly detailed, in a tone perceived as mocking, the extent of the damage the Russians were attempting to conceal with large tarpaulins. Exactly 4 vitally important Russian fighter jets, parked on those supposedly impenetrable and sheltered aprons in the Ural Mountains, sustained direct hits and severe damage. The severity of the attack necessitated the dispatch of special inspectors and highly qualified aviation engineers from Moscow to the region for damage assessment. Leaked, high-resolution satellite imagery unequivocally documented this substantial defeat, which the Kremlin had sought to obscure. The heavily damaged aircraft had been hastily towed by tractors to unrelated remote sections of the apron, presumably in an attempt to hide them from subsequent Ukrainian satellite surveillance passes. This raises the critical question: what precisely did the Russian Air Force lose following this impactful attack operation? The successful targeting of 4 high-value aircraft deep within what was considered a secure rear area represents an unprecedented operational achievement. It demonstrates a significant shift in the balance of power regarding long-range precision strike capabilities, challenging established notions of air defense effectiveness. The strategic value of these aircraft, targeted by Ukraine deep within enemy territory, a full 1,700 kilometers away, and despite considerable risk, was, for Russia, virtually incalculable. These aircraft represented far more than conventional, easily replaceable machines on the battlefield. They were symbols of national prestige for the Russian defense industry. Specifically, the Su-57 Felon, among the aircraft struck, was considered the zenith of Russian aviation engineering, the culmination of billions of dollars in protracted research and development efforts. As the singular and most potent embodiment of Russia's 5th-generation stealth fighter jet concept, these aircraft were conceived as a direct counter to American aerial supremacy. Each unit, priced between $100 and $120 million, depending on its sensitive avionics equipment, constituted a substantial flying asset. Capable of speeds approaching Mach 2, or twice the speed of sound, these machines were Russia's most prestigious export offering to international buyers such as India and nations in the Middle East. Equipped with their advanced N036 Belka active electronically scanned array radar system, DII-RCM laser countermeasures, and unparalleled super maneuverability, they were marketed globally as theoretically invincible aerial platforms. Furthermore, with the R-37M long-range air-to-air missiles covertly carried within their fuselage, they were specifically designed to engage targets from extended distances without detection by enemy radars. Conversely, the Su-34 fullback fighter bombers, also targeted by drones on the extensive aprons of the Chagall base, represented a distinct and brutal aspect of the conflict. Valued between approximately $35 and $50 million, these jets were not primarily for display, but served as the tireless workhorses, bearing the true, arduous burden of the war. Featuring a two-person crew seated side by side and capable of carrying over 8 tons of weapon payload, these substantial aircraft, with their aerodynamic structure, closely resembled flying tanks. It was these very jets that consistently pounded defensive positions in eastern and southern Ukraine with massive 3-ton heavy glide bombs, thereby influencing the front line's equilibrium. The production of Su-57 aircraft has been characterized by extreme slowness, inconsistency, and difficulty from its inception, largely attributable to Western microchip embargoes and stringent technological sanctions. As of May 2026, the total number of Su-57s produced, encompassing the initial 10 prototypes utilized for testing years prior, remained constrained to between 30 and 42 units. The quantity of operationally ready Su-57s, defined as those having successfully completed all tests and possessing the requisite equipment for direct combat engagement, stood at a critically low threshold, well below 30. The prohibitive cost of these jets, the arduous nature of import substitution for their electronic components, and their limited numbers collectively deterred the Russian command echelon from deploying them in active combat against Ukrainian air defenses. They were maintained behind front lines to avoid becoming targets for Patriot batteries, instead being utilized exclusively in low-risk missions, such as launching standoff cruise missiles from extended ranges or conducting radar system tests within secure zones. The Su-34 fleet, which has borne the primary operational burden, has experienced continuous and significant attrition since the commencement of the conflict, facing Ukraine's increasingly sophisticated and artificial intelligence-supported modern air defense systems. According to verified visual evidence from Ukrainian intelligence, at least 41 aircraft from this substantial fleet, which numbered approximately 140 active planes during the initial days of the invasion, have been definitively struck and destroyed. The confirmed loss of over 40 Su-34s, representing a significant portion of Russia's initial operational fleet, highlights an unsustainable rate of attrition for a high-value asset. This level of depletion for a primary strike aircraft is unusual in modern conventional warfare, indicating a severe challenge to Russia's air superiority. The approximately 100 Su-34s remaining to Russia are operating within a constant war of attrition, with each sortie carrying the apprehension of a potential new loss. This context underscores why the devastating attack at the Chagall Air Base transcends a mere tactical incident involving the destruction of a few metallic airframes. This singular and audacious military success served as the definitive declaration that Russia's established tactic of relocating valuable aircraft to the Ural Mountains had demonstrably failed. The Kremlin leadership has now been compelled to acknowledge that even its most valuable and expensive military assets, potentially requiring decades for replacement, are no longer secure from Ukraine's increasingly extended reach. The concept of an untouchable rear front, a strategic cornerstone for Russian generals and a narrative presented to the public since the war's inception, irrevocably collapsed in flames on the night of April 25th amidst the persistent hum of drone engines. This significant technological advancement achieved by Ukraine, developed entirely by its own engineers, has fostered a strategic asymmetric imbalance spanning continents, impacting beyond the immediate frontline engagements. The Lyuty Bubber and the latest generation Rodur-type autonomous kamikaze drones are systematically rewriting the classic rules of aerial warfare, which have been taught in military academies for decades. The vast, seemingly endless, and often winter-frozen territorial integrity of European Russia is no longer an inaccessible fortress for the Ukrainian armed forces. It has transformed into an exposed, largely defenseless, and extensive hunting ground. Strategic assets such as the massive Tu-95 and supersonic Tu-160 nuclear bombers, typically housed at the Engels base, are no longer secure at any time or within any hangar. Top-secret weapon testing centers in Akhtubinsk, the Kola Peninsula, and the operational tactical fleets in Mozdok are now operating under a state of constant alert, marked by persistent apprehension. Key hubs forming the entire railway logistics network for the war, including Voronezh, Rostov, and Kursk, are now anticipating a potentially devastating, artificial intelligence-driven strike that could descend silently from the sky at any moment. Not only military air bases, but also the colossal strategic ammunition depots carved into the mountains surrounding Yekaterinburg and the substantial fuel refineries in western Siberia, which finance the country, are now definitively within the range of Ukrainian systems. According to Western military strategy experts, this asymmetric warfare capability, which Ukraine is producing at an astonishing rate in underground facilities, is definitively and irreversibly altering the trajectory of the conflict. With relatively low-cost smart drones, priced in the tens of thousands of dollars, easily mass-produced, and capable of operating in swarms, Russia's formidable air power, painstakingly developed over decades, with budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars, is being slowly but steadily eroded. While Russia endeavors to exert conventional ground pressure on the front line through massive artillery barrages and human wave tactics, the modern rear front security and logistical arteries feeding its vast war machine have been severely compromised. This extensive strategic degradation represents not merely a military vulnerability experienced on the battlefield for Moscow, but also an insurmountable economic and prestige loss, particularly while the nation grapples with global sanctions. Glide bomb operations, previously the Russian army's most effective weapon in breaching Ukrainian positions, are now facing slowdowns due to increasing aircraft losses and maintenance challenges. Relocating the few remaining intact aircraft even deeper into Siberia to makeshift bases lacking adequate personnel and logistical infrastructure simply to evade Ukrainian range would effectively neutralize their daily operational efficiency. Conversely, dismantling the multi-billion-dollar S-400 air defense systems from around the strategic capital and redeploying them to protect these isolated rear bases would leave the front lines critically exposed to the Ukrainian Air Force. The profound psychological impact generated by these relentless attacks on the Russian populace, its elites, and the military is too deep and pervasive to be quantified by any mathematical figure or war statistic. The pervasive sentiment that no location, no city, and no military base within the country is truly safe has become ingrained in the consciousness of everyone, from the highest-ranking general to the lowest-level contract soldier. On the international diplomatic stage, Ukraine has rapidly ascended to the position of a formidable actor, capable of indigenously producing core technology despite embargoes, and of paralyzing a nuclear superpower within its own territory using its own resources. The capacity to strike at the heart of Russia from 1,700 kilometers away with domestically developed and manufactured weapons, rather than solely relying on limited Western military aid, has uniquely and irreversibly strengthened Kyiv's negotiating position. As of May 2026, the world's first and only officially established unmanned systems army is demonstrably, intelligently, and resolutely challenging the absolute and long-held dominance in the skies, previously held by the old world's multi-billion-dollar jets. The balance of power in this highly critical aerial dimension of the war is shifting in Ukraine's favor at a terrifying pace, one which the Kremlin's military strategists could neither foresee nor devise an effective defensive countermeasure to halt. The peaks of the Ural Mountains, historically considered impassable for centuries and a protective barrier for Russia from the east, have long ceased to be the promised sanctuary for modern air forces. Instead, these vast, silent, and frigid mountains have now become a colossal technological graveyard, where the remnants of steel, once deemed invincible by President Putin, lie burning. The question now remains, how will an empire, stripped of its perceived invincibility, adapt to a new era where its geographical depth offers no defense? Presented by TGN.